Lady Diana Spencer was plucked from the obscure ranks of the British aristocracy and became a fairy tale princess. Then suddenly, in August 1997, Diana's life came to an end. The world stood still as news of Diana's car crash reverberated around the world's media. But what the official history books will not tell you is that on the very day of that fateful crash in Paris, rumours circulated that Diana had been assassinated by British military intelligence or the American CIA. In this film, we show you for the first time the true history of the British royal family, whose ancestors have stabbed and slashed their way to power throughout the ages. You'll see how Diana was bred from birth for her role to serve the royal family, and how Prince Charles callously continued his love affair with Camilla Parker Bowles throughout his marriage to Diana, and how Diana had to search her apartment in Kensington Palace for listening devices placed by MI5, who then distributed secretly taped and edited private phone conversations to the media in order to discredit Diana's public image. For the first time, we reveal details of the bungled attempt by MI5 to murder Camilla Parker Bowles just weeks before Diana's car crash in Paris. We also exclusively reveal that the black Mercedes carrying Princess Diana had previously been stolen at gunpoint, and that the engine management microchip had been replaced so that the car could be controlled remotely. We also interview the authors of a new book, Diana: The Hidden Evidence, which reveals that MI5 and MI6 officers had advance warning of the crash which killed Princess Diana, her companion Dodi Al-Fayed, and the driver Henri Paul. Join us now on a quest for the truth, and find out how Diana, Princess of Wales, was murdered by the monarchy. Throughout the centuries, the British royal family have had a passion for murder and a fascination with the occult. Whilst innocent country folk were persecuted for devil worship in medieval Britain, the royal family played host to astrologers, alchemists and magicians such as John Dee, Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton. To this day, the British royal family patronise various secret societies such as Freemasonry and the Order of the Garter. Freemasonry is a global cult which forces members to reenact murder, undergo a mock funeral, and requires all who take part to swear blood-curdling oaths of allegiance to the Masonic god Yarbulon. Reverend John Lawrence wrote a book called Freemasonry, Is It a Religion? His conclusions were that Freemasonry is a cult which worships a tripantheon god, most definitely not the god of the Holy Bible. The Masonic god is inspired by the mythical spirit of Baal, the ancient devil. As a member of the royal family, Princess Diana was surrounded by Freemasons. Queen Elizabeth II is Grand Patroness of English Freemasonry, and the Duke of Edinburgh has been a Master Mason since 1952. Living under the same roof as Diana at Kensington Palace is Britain's most senior royal Freemason, the Duke of Kent. Seen here leading a grand Masonic ceremony, the Duke of Kent was installed as Grand Master of British Freemasonry by the Earl of Scarborough in 1964. Every Mason swears blood oaths of allegiance to his fellow brothers. A Mason must support his fellow brothers even if he is in full knowledge of wrongdoing by his brethren.
The dangers you have escaped are those of stabbing and strangling.
In every strata of British government, there are Masons who will carry out illegal duties, such as murder, on behalf of the royal family.
Your own death by stabbing, and the brother that held it would have remained firm and done his duty.
There are over 600,000 Masons in Britain today, many of them directly serving the royal family in the government, armed forces, and in the secret services. One of the most powerful factions within Freemasonry are the Knights of Malta. They wear the Maltese cross around their necks. As Diana was led up the aisle, she was entering a world dominated by Masonic tradition, of skullduggery, black magic, and murder. The ancestors of Prince Charles were often fascinated with witchcraft. King James I wrote an authoritative book on the subject called Demonologies. Prior to Henry VIII's reign, Jeanne of Navarre, widow of King Henry IV of England, was accused of having used witchcraft to seek the death of her stepson Henry V. Jeanne of Navarre was convicted without a trial, largely on evidence given by her chaplain. Some historians have suggested that Jeanne of Navarre was a member of a well-organized coven of witches based in the heart of the British royal family. To this very day, in the Royal Palace of Westminster, seat of Her Majesty's government, blood-curdling oaths and secret rituals are acted out by members of Parliament and the Queen's Privy Councillors at the New Welcome Masonic Lodge.
This is London. The following bulletin was issued at 9:25. The King's life is moving peacefully towards its close.
Well, I'll give you one example of how there's one law for the poor and no law for the rich, especially the royal family. Back in the late 1930s, the old King George, in his Jubilee year, he was very ill. And there is such a thing as euthanasia. And euthanasia is a technique of killing somebody. It's a mercy killing for somebody that's suffering from a life-threatening disease. And it's completely illegal in the United Kingdom if you were to kill somebody, who requested that they wanted to die before some painful disease took hold of them. You would go to prison for murder, or at the very least you'd go to prison for manslaughter. The Queen asked Lord Dawson of Penn, the royal physician, to perform euthanasia, in other words, to kill the king before his illness took its natural course. Lord Dawson of Penn took a menu card and wrote a bulletin that was circulated to the BBC, which said that the king is naturally coming to the end of his life. That was an absolute, utter lie. What happened is that Lord Dawson of Penn filled 2 syringes, one syringe full of cocaine, and the other syringe was full of morphine, which is an opium. Morphine is very, very similar to heroin. And amazingly, instructed the nurse to inject King George with these 2 syringes into his jugular vein. The nurse refused. So Lord Dawson of Penn took these syringes and injected the king himself. Now this act of euthanasia, which is completely illegal within the United Kingdom, was timed so that the king was killed so that it would be announced in time for the morning papers the next day. And if any of us were to do that within the borders of the United Kingdom, we would be arrested and imprisoned for murder or manslaughter. And that's a good example of how there is one law for the poor and no law for the rich. The marriage was, a marriage made in heaven as far as the media were concerned. The Sun newspaper, which was started by Rupert Murdoch, wasn't that old. In 1981, when the royal engagement was announced, by Rupert Murdoch, wasn't that old. In 1981, when the royal engagement was announced, the Sun newspaper, I think, had only been in publication for about 20 odd years. And this whole phenomenon of tabloid newspapers, tabloid radio, tabloid television hadn't really been around for longer than, I think, 20, 25 years in Britain. And so Diana, unfortunately for her, became the target for these rather sort of oixome hooligan type photographers. That kind of journalism, I mean, you can't even really call that any, you can't, that's not journalism at all. In actual fact, these men who work for the tabloid press, who hounded Diana, you couldn't even describe these people as serious photographers. What I consider a photographer is somebody like Yves Bertrand, the French photographer who does these amazing aerial photographs of different places on planet Earth. These people are more or less like hunters, except without guns. They have cameras. Though I have to say that some of the cameras with the giant long lenses do look like shotguns. And Diana was a teenager when she came into the situation, and there was several instances where the press had actually driven her to tears. While the early years of the Charles and Di marriage are going on, it's very, very interesting because Prince Philip made, quite a few politically incorrect remarks, which I'm sure many of us know about. Allegedly, he described Chinese people as slitty-eyed bastards during a state visit. I believe it was to the Great Wall of China. Allegedly, he also really complained about the quality of gravy to some state banquet and described it as washing up water. Allegedly, he was also asked what would he like to come back on Earth as if he was reincarnated, and he said, "I'd like to be reincarnated." This is allegedly what he said, as a bacteria that would wipe out a large proportion of the Earth's population. Prince Philip is not Greek. That is a complete fallacy. His family are actually German. And his sisters are completely and utterly out of the royal limelight right from the first day that he comes into the public eye in the 1950s, late 1940s, early 1950s. And his sisters married senior Nazis. Now, Prince Philip was the subject of a documentary which was broadcast 4 years ago on Channel 4 television in Great Britain. And he was a playboy, a classic royal playboy. And this documentary portrayed him as going to, sort of the jet set sort of parties of that era. And he was friendly with Stephen Ward. Now, Stephen Ward was a gentleman in, the sort of swinging 60s who used to procure rather attractive young ladies for escorting members of the aristocracy to parties, cocktail evenings, dances, and this kind of thing. One of the young ladies that Stephen Ward procured for one of his friends was a lady called Christine Keeler. And Christine Keeler had an affair with the Labour Minister of War at the same time as also bed-hopping with a senior Russian military officer. And this is right in the middle of the Cold War. And John Profumo, the minister who'd had this, affair with Christine Keeler, resigned and came under intense media scrutiny. And Prince Philip knew Stephen Ward. And Stephen Ward was the man who was responsible for procuring the services of Christine Keeler for John Profumo. And in actual fact, at the time when all of this came out, and obviously being a pimp and prostitution was illegal, the time that this all came into the public eye, there was an exhibition in London of sketches which had been done by Stephen Ward, who was an artist. They were sketches which had been done at Buckingham Palace of members of the royal family, which proves that Stephen Ward, this society pimp, if you like, was very well connected with the royal family and with other people working at Buckingham Palace. And there is a sketch by Stephen Ward. I mean, Stephen Ward was an excellent artist, and it is of Prince Philip. And they were friends, and that is absolutely for sure. So with the newspapers going to town and being extremely interested in the extramarital activities of John Profumo, and trying to piece together the actual story of all of these high society parties with these working class call girls being brought in by Stephen Ward, the royal family obviously panicked. They didn't want anything to do at all with Stephen Ward, who'd been arrested and was in the dock for racketeering, pimping prostitutes. So they sent Anthony Blunt, who is the Queen's nephew and the curator of the Queen's private art collection, down to the gallery that was exhibiting the sketches by Stephen Ward, and gave Anthony Blunt all of the money to buy those sketches. Now, what's really an eye-opener is that Anthony Blunt was a KGB agent, and he was later outed as such, and he was loyal to Lenin and Leninists, and he was a Trotskyite, and he was actually a mole inside Buckingham Palace, feeding information about the royal family back to the communists in Russia. What transpired is that rather conveniently, Stephen Ward committed suicide. Now, what's transpired in recent years is that we've now found out that Stephen Ward was not only friends with the royal family, he was an occultist, and he was interested in black magic. And for part of his life he was living in a small cottage on a private estate called the Cliveden estate, which is owned by the Astor family, who are a very, very well-to-do, well-established branch of the British aristocracy. And after Stephen Ward's death, I mean, I won't call it suicide, because I think that Stephen Ward was killed in order to stop the Profumo affair from getting any more dangerous for the royal family. After Stephen Ward's death, the Astor family actually paid a Catholic priest to visit the cottage where Stephen Ward had lived. And the reason they did that is because there was ghost activity there. Apparently there'd been lots of seances and rituals done there as part of these high society gatherings. And as anybody who has experimented with the Ouija board knows, if you don't do the whole thing properly and put the spirits to sleep, they hang around. And the cottage that Stephen Ward had occupied on the Cliveden estate had become haunted. And the Catholic priest made a comment, which is on record, and he said that the dark forces, the spiritual black forces that he encountered during the exorcism were the darkest, most powerful forces that he had ever experienced in all of his years working as an exorcist.
Our investigation into the death of Princess Diana starts here, at Eltham Palace, known as the Secret Palace, just a few miles from central London. This is where the young Henry VIII grew up, and several centuries later, when the palace was occupied by the wealthy Courtaulds family, Eltham Palace became the headquarters of an organisation which evolved into what we now call MI6, Overseas British Military Intelligence. This is the oldest bridge in London. It was here on the banks of the moat that Henry VIII composed his famous song, Greensleeves.
Henri VIII is also remembered for having 6 wives, but what he is least remembered for is being a murderer. Henri VIII ordered the execution of his wife, Anne Boleyn, simply because she had not bared him a son. Anne was imprisoned and beheaded before a court of nobility at the Tower of London. Henry also ordered the execution of several men who he falsely claimed had committed adultery with Anne. Anne's daughter succeeded the throne as Elizabeth I. In September 1560, 2 years into her reign, the 27-year-old Queen Elizabeth I was implicated in a suspected murder of Lady Robert Dudley, the wife of Lord Robert Dudley, who was Queen Elizabeth's secret lover. The coroner's jury returned a verdict of accidental death. Queen Elizabeth made Lord Dudley the Earl of Leicester, but they never married, for fear of the mass speculation and suspicions throughout Britain, causing them both to be accused of murder. On the 1st of February 1587, Queen Elizabeth I ordered the execution of her half-sister, Mary, Queen of Scots. However, Henry VIII and his daughter Elizabeth I were not the first murdering monarchs to occupy the royal throne. They were descended from a long aristocratic tradition of crowned killers who would often savour a passion for black magic. 80 years prior to Queen Elizabeth I's reign, in 1483, King Richard III commissioned Sir James Tyrrell to kill his nephews, the young Prince Edward and Prince Richard. In the dead of night, Sir James Tyrrell and 2 assistants smothered the young princes, thus ensuring the bloodline of Richard III became the new monarchy of Britain. Prior to King Richard murdering the 2 young princes, in 1477, the Duke of Clarence said that his brother, King Edward, practiced the... In 1477, the Duke of Clarence said that his brother, King Edward, practiced the black arts and used his knowledge of witchcraft to concoct poisons for the king's enemies. The Scottish King Macbeth was one of several early Scottish monarchs who were crowned killers. Many times, aided and abetted by sorcerers and witches, Scottish noblemen would kill a king, seize the throne for themselves, and then in turn meet with a violent death at the hands of another murdering monarch. In 1437, King James of Scotland was stabbed to death by a bunch of henchmen wielding swords and daggers. They were ordered to kill King James I by the Earl of Athol, who claimed he was the rightful King of Scotland. The King's son, James II, stabbed to death the 8th Earl of Douglas in 1452. The Earl was the biggest landowner in Scotland. 3 years after being murdered by the King, the Earl's land was annexed by the Crown Estates. Well, I knew at one point today that we were going to discuss the subject of treason and what happens to people who are guilty of treason. Diana was most certainly a person who committed very, very serious treason. The Panorama interview that Martin Bashir did with Diana is one long treasonous offence. I think that if Diana had not committed treason, if she had not made that panorama documentary, then the chances are that she would still be alive to this day. Well, what I've done is I've brought along a few books today that are from my own personal collection. I've got a huge library. Some of my books go back to the medieval era, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century manuscripts and that kind of thing. And there is this whole notion that was suggested in David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret, which really portrayed the crash in the tunnel as being the beginning of a whole ritual sacrifice of Diana. And of course, people that were guilty of treason were ritually sacrificed. And I made a film recently in my series of Illuminati films called Murdered by the Monarchy. And in that film you can see the terrible ritual killing of people who had their bodies cut into different pieces, and they used to cut the heart of the traitor out and put this on display publicly, and parts of the body of the traitor were distributed for various rituals amongst the aristocratic and royal nobility, the elite of Europe. And you know, people say to me, it's not true, is it, that royal people are involved in black magic? Well, I just laugh at that, because the whole of the European royal elite, the aristocratic, noble, political, leading elite of society, throughout the whole of history, have been involved in the occult. And so I've brought a few books along today to just illustrate some of the most notorious black magician type characters that have populated the ranks of royal families and the nobility and the aristocracy throughout the ages. So I think we'll just have a look at them here. This is the castle, the famous castle at Treason in France, which was previously the home of a very wealthy man called Gilles de Retz, or Gilles de Retz. Now, he was the Marshal of France, a very successful military career. He retired at an early age in his mid-20s, and he then took on the study of black magic in this castle. And he was a member of the nobility. He'd formerly assisted Joan of Arc in her campaigns against the British. And he performed black magic rituals in this castle with the help of an Italian priest called Prelati. And so many children were going missing wherever Gilles de Retz appeared, that eventually his black magic came under the scrutiny of the authorities, and he was eventually arrested, tortured, and executed. And he was executed on charges of taking no less than 150 children, though it's quite likely that he was responsible for the sacrifice, so the killing, and sadomasochistic black magic rituals with these children, probably in the number of thousands and thousands of children. And this kind of thing is still going on in France and Belgium and the United Kingdom amongst the nobility to this day. And we know this because there was a famous case in Belgium recently. A chap called Marc Dutroux was arrested, and he was found in possession of keys to dungeons which were located under houses in suburban areas in Belgium. And these children were kept imprisoned. They'd been snatched, and these children were just some of the literally millions of people that go missing every year. And Marc Dutroux's confession alleges that all he was doing was procuring children for sadomasochistic use by very, very wealthy people in Belgium. He claims that certain members of the European nobility were involved. And of course the word sadomasochism, or the term sadomasochism, sado is from the name of Sade, the Marquis de Sade, who's another member of the French nobility, and he used to, get young girls from local villages and used to partake in sadomasochistic, horrible, evil kind of soirees. This is the famous Madame de Montespan, who was the mistress of King Louis XIV of France. Ms. Montespan actually hired a black magician to put a spell on the king's wife to ensure that the king's wife would never have any children. She was also the employer of a priest who used to perform black masses. This priest was called Abbé Guibourg, and he used to perform various black masses for members of nobility and perform sacrifices of children with a naked woman laying on the altar. And again we see this link between royalty and sacrifice. It's it's historically it's all there, except it's been swept under a very plush carpet. Well, Hampton Court Palace is one of the most haunted places, not only in Britain, but in the entire world. And it was the official palace, the official residence of the royal family. It was originally built in the 1200s, and then it was massively added to in the 1500s. And many famous royal people have had their homes at Hampton Court. Henri VIII is one, and Henri VIII was a psychopath. He was somebody that would fly into royal tempers, and he would decree that a certain person had committed adultery and therefore had committed treason, and would behead them. Not a very nice chap at all, Henri VIII, even though he wrote a good piece of music called Greensleeves. Now, one of his wives that he accused of being adulterous and therefore being treasonous was a woman called Catherine Howard. And Catherine Howard realised as soon as that she had been accused of adultery, she knew that she was going to have her head cut off. So she ran to see the king to plead mercy for him, but she never made it because the palace guards arrested her and dragged her away. And still to this day, from time to time, you can hear the screams of the ghost of Catherine Howard. And she was dragged away through a part of the palace which is now called the Haunted Gallery. You know, there's no doubt that Hampton Court is most definitely infested with psychic activity and with ghosts. One of the most common things that happens at Hampton Court is that this grey ghostly mist hangs above the floors in the kitchens, and this is ectoplasm. And I made a film called Spirit World which discusses ectoplasm, and many of the people that work in the kitchens of Hampton Court, which is, you know, partly opened to the public each day, many people who work in those kitchens have seen this ectoplasm, which is a mist. Hampton Court is a gigantic structure. It's a gigantic royal palace. It's more than 1,000 individual rooms. Now, one of these rooms were recently discovered. I go back now to the time of Henry VIII. Henry VIII's wife, Jane Seymour, she died giving birth to the young Prince Edward. The young prince had a nurse who was called Mrs. Penn, and this is in the 1500s, and she was buried actually inside Hampton Court grounds at the old chapel. But in the 1800s, that chapel was demolished and her grave was disturbed. And from that moment onwards, workmen kept hearing this kind of constant whirring sound coming from behind a wall in Hampton Court Palace. So eventually a decision was made to actually tear this wall down and find out what was the source of this whirring sound. Well, as soon as they pulled the wall down, the sound stopped. But they found a room, a previously forgotten small room, a small chamber. And inside that chamber was a spinning wheel, exactly the same type of spinning wheel that Mrs. Penn, the nurse of the young Prince Edward, had used when she was alive. It's very rare to see a photo of a ghost where you can see the entire shape of the body. That is extremely rare. It's quite common to see a hand, and obviously it's even more common to sense the feeling that there is a ghost there, but not see anything. And in the so-called Haunted Gallery at Hampton Court, tourists have been punched by poltergeists, which is a term which is used to describe a ghost which has a lot of kinetic power, and it can actually move objects, and it can touch people, and it can punch you. But it's very, very rare to have a ghost who has telekinetic power, can actually move physical objects, and at the same time is actually visible. Now, in October 2003, a very, very strange incident occurred. On the first day, alarms went off in a part of Hampton Court which is used for exhibitions. And these alarms are linked to fire escape doors. And it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and guards went down and they found these doors open. There was nobody there. And so they just closed the doors. Well, the next day, the same thing happened. At the same time, about 1 p.m. lunchtime. This is in full daylight. And the closed-circuit TV cameras really picked up something that was, to my experience, totally unique in terms of footage that you usually see of ghosts. The footage wasn't released to the public for 2 months. It came to be in the public domain in December 2003. It makes me wonder what was going on for 2 months with people, I dare say, analysing this footage. If that is a ghost, I have to say, having made a full-on feature-length documentary called Spirit World, all about spirits and ectoplasm and electronic voice phenomena and hauntings, I have to say that this piece of footage from Hampton Court Palace, if that is a ghost, is the world's singular most incredible piece of ghost footage. This person, or this figure, is displaying tremendous power to make those doors fly open and then to slam them shut with such force that one of the doors actually bounces back open again. If it is a ghost, then we're dealing with a full physical apparition, and a ghost which has got poltergeist strength in its spirit. It takes a huge amount of energy for a spirit to manifest itself into a visible form. And then it takes a huge amount of extra effort for it to then interact with physical objects. This is why poltergeists are usually only sensed, and only the objects which they move are seen by witnesses. The actual poltergeist itself is rarely ever seen. Well, the other question, of course, is could this just be a person? Now, there are tour guides at Hampton Court Palace who dress in period costumes, and I visited the palace in the winter of 2004. I got there and it was fairly dark, but they were still doing these tours with the tour guides dressed in traditional costume holding lanterns. Now, the costumes which I saw bear no resemblance to the clothes which this strange character is seen wearing. In actual fact, the robes which the figure is wearing are really the kinds of robes that an alchemist or a magician of the 16th century
or of the medieval era, somebody like Agrippa or Abraham the Jew, these magicians wore robes exactly like we see in the video footage from the closed-circuit TV camera. My conclusion so far is not really made. What I would say at this point is that 4 years have passed. If this was a tour guide or it was somebody having a practical joke at the palace, there's been more than enough time for that to come to light. If it's a ghost, then this is the most remarkable ghost footage ever. If it's a person, then this is obviously a person who wants privacy. They're slamming those doors closed. Their demeanour, their movements suggest that they are in a huff. They're in a, you know, there's no time to lose, slam those doors, get back inside kind of attitude. Now, of course, there is one other possible hypothesis, and that goes back to the research which was exposed by David Icke in The Biggest Secret, where he quotes the sources, people who say that they had attended rituals at royal palaces. And Hampton Court is one of these places which is steeped in the history of the royal bloodline of Great Britain. There is no question that at the time of Henry VIII, murder by magic was accepted as fact by the nobility, the aristocracy, and the royalty. There was a famous case involving a witch, a woman who was accused of witchcraft. Her name was Mabel Brigg. This is during the life of Henry VIII, and she was arrested under the suspicion that she tried to kill Henry VIII using witchcraft. Well, the fact that the order was sent out to arrest her is proof enough that the royals have, throughout the ages, taken magic and magical ritual and spells very, very, very seriously indeed. So, this could be somebody, a person, dressed as a medieval magician, dressed in actual fact in the same kind of robes that are described by the eyewitnesses that supplied information to David Icke for his book The Biggest Secret. This could be a person who's partaking in a magical ritual which is taking place inside a royal palace. And this is exactly the scenario which is described in the book by David Icke.
It's no accident that the Queen's, present Queen's grandmother is a direct descendant from the sister of Vlad Dracul, on whom the Dracula stories are named, are based. So Diana knew this, and then I come across people like an American lady, Arizona Wilder, who again was involved and a victim of this mind control project, and was used to conduct rituals for them. Under a mind-controlled state, they are mind-controlled to conduct these rituals in a certain way.
And these were taking place on royal properties in Scotland?
Yes, exactly, in Balmoral, and there's a particular place in Belgium which is known as the Mothers of Darkness Castle, which is funnily located in the same area that child murder and satanic ring was based that came to light clearly involving the establishment figures of Belgium and was a massive cover-up. When a real investigator, a prosecutor, got involved, of course, they had to get rid of him, and 300,000 Belgians went on the march one day in protest at the cover-up. Well, all these things interconnect. And she told me that she and another two of such people have told me the same story, that she was actually in Britain at rituals at which Diana was being abused in part of these rituals in a mind-controlled state, because there's no question whatsoever that when you talk to the people I've talked to, that Princess Diana was one of the victims of mind control. One of the things that they do is they mind control the children of the aristocratic families, again for a reason we've discussed, which is the Illuminati mind, which is different to the regular run of human mind. It cannot stand the thought that it's not controlling events. Therefore, it does not want cuckoos in the bloodline nest. Therefore, it makes sure that the kids undergo mind control from an early age, which is why so many of these aristocratic families are so bloody dysfunctional, because they're all kind of, had their minds played with.
They're bred from birth to serve a role.
Exactly. Diana's role, and I'm not kidding, from birth, would have been to have been sacrificed in that place at that time. And people, and I understand, will find that staggering and impossible to believe. Well, you should have been around me for the last 14 years, and it wouldn't be impossible to believe. And her other role was to had her genes to the Windsors, because if we want to get really bizarre, the Windsors are not, like these Illuminati bloodlines in general, are not the same DNA as the rest of the global population. They need an infusion of human genetics to hold the balance of their DNA between the human and what they really are, which is actually not human as we understand human. And what was happening, as Christine Fitzgerald, this close confidant of Diana for 9 years, explained to me, was that the genes of the Windsors were getting too imbalanced to the non-human side. And it was going to become clear within a very few generations that they weren't all that they seemed to be. And what they needed was an infusion of human genes. And as I've written in my books for years, and so many insiders have told me, and others, the key genetics that these people like to interbreed with are blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. Now, where did I hear that before? Oh yes, Hitler's master race. And they want to preserve this master race because they need to keep interbreeding with that genetics. So, yeah, exactly.
Those traits with the Spencer family.
Exactly. So what happens? They bring Diana in. What does Diana say in her accounts that she allowed to be published in various books? That once the children were born, Charles basically was saying to her, that's it.
It seems to me that if anyone should have come under intense media scrutiny, it should have been Prince Philip for having his links with the Profumo affair, or it should have been the Queen, where one of her close relatives was a KGB agent. But that never happened. In all the research I've done about European monarchs, I've never been able to find a single monarch in recent times that's had a full-time job. When you analyse what they do, what takes up their time in terms of the royal diary is really patronising military organisations such as retired veteran organisations. The Chelsea Pensioners Club is a good example. And of course the military are there as Her Majesty's military services to protect the monarchy and to defend the realm. Military officers swear obedience to protect Queen and country or King and country. They don't swear allegiance to protect the British public. Now Diana was completely different. Diana took on her royal duties with a lot more care and a lot more compassion than any other royal person that I've researched throughout all the articles I've written and the films I've made that concern royal subjects. I have to say that Diana was the only royal person to really embrace, literally embrace, people who were suffering from leprosy, AIDS. She used to take her children to shelters where women who'd been battered by their husbands were given refuge. She used to take the young princes out onto the streets and show them what life was like for homeless people. On several foreign visits, Diana used to request that she could meet with children in hospitals suffering from illnesses, and children who'd suffered loss of limbs through landmines and this kind of thing. And on more than one occasion, Diana was seen crying and showing real empathy with those children. And this really brought her into the collective bosom of everyone on the planet. She was the world's most photographed woman. She was a member of what can only be described as the richest royal dynasty the world has ever known. And here she was, crying openly, meeting children in third world countries, and really showing a great deal of empathy. I've never ever come across any other royal person that did that. And this, I feel, reading between the lines, and not really being able to find a single newspaper cutting that shows any support for Diana from any other member of the royal family. This, I think, showed that Diana had real feelings for real people, and that this put her at odds with major senior members of the royal family such as Prince Philip and the Queen. She brought her children up in a atmosphere of complete family love, and I don't think it's overstating the case to say that many of the royal children throughout history have grown up in an atmosphere which has not been compassionate. It hasn't been a family-loving situation. And I suspect that all of this really alienated Diana from the senior royals. And by his own admission, when the relationship with Diana had broken down after the young princes had been born, through his own admission on a documentary which was made, Prince Charles then returned to his true love, and it is true that he's had a powerful, sexual, emotional, loving relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, regardless of the fact that she was actually married to Andrew Parker Bowles. What transpired, according to the book which was written by Andrew Morton, called Diana, A True Story, is that all of this good work, all of this compassion, all of this loving empathy which Diana displayed, led her to be ostracized by the royal family. It seems to me that the more that she cared, and the more that she wore her heart on her sleeve, and the more that she showed that she had great respect for people like Mother Teresa, the more the royal family tried to ignore her. It's one thing being successful in the public eye, as she was with all of her charity work. It's quite another thing to be a failure in the eyes of the senior royals when you're at home with them. And I think that this dichotomy created an inattention with Diana and a dis-ease with the royal family. And dis-ease causes stress and tension, and dis-ease is actually disease. And according to the book by Andrew Morton, Diana used to suffer from bulimia. And bulimia is a very, very serious disorder, as is anorexia. And all credit to Diana, she actually publicly admitted that via the Andrew Morton book, and she fought through it, and she started on a regime of exercise. At the time when she was murdered, she was really very, very physically fit. And she used to visit the gym every day, and she worked her way through this disorder, and she worked her way through the ostracization that she suffered at the hands of the royal family. If we consider all of these pressures that were on Diana, we can see that she was somehow caught in a marriage which was a marriage without love between her and Charles. She was in a marriage where Charles's parents considered her as somebody that was maybe perhaps losing it mentally. And rumours were circulating that Diana was mentally unstable.
I'm supposed to be dragged off in a minute with men in white coats, so if it's all right with you, I thought I might postpone my nervous breakdown to a more appropriate moment.
And all I can say is that, those rumours probably exasperated her eating disabilities. And according to
the confessional parts of Andrew Morton's book, not a single member of the royal family offered her any help whatsoever. She did have a close relationship with Barry Manicky, who was a personal protection officer. And I know that an American television company made a documentary claiming that Diana and Barry Manicky had more than just a close friendship, that they actually had an affair. Shortly after this broadcast, which I believe was broadcast in America, Barry Manicky was killed in a car accident. She came to the point where she wanted to go through the process of writing this down, and her cathartic process led to the publication of an entire book, which was ghost written for Diana by Andrew Morton. And transcripts were smuggled out of Kensington Palace, and her butler, her loyal butler, Paul Burrell, actually writes in his book, which is called A Royal Duty, how there were these clandestine deliveries of transcripts of passages of the book, which was published under the title Diana, Her True Story, and these transcripts were smuggled out in their shopping basket on a bicycle. Now, the publication of that book, I feel that it must have been the last nail in the coffin for Diana. From that point onwards, I suspect that there was a war, an emotional, economic, marital war that was taking place behind closed doors at Kensington Palace and at Buckingham Palace and at Highgrove, which is the country residence of Prince Charles. Just a few months after the Andrew Morton book had been published, an audio tape recording surfaced in the tabloid press. And these tapes famously became known as the Diana Gate tapes, which is a reference to Watergate, which is the scandal uncovered by two reporters for the Washington Post that eventually brought down the Nixon administration in America. So they called these audio recordings of Diana's telephone conversations the Diana Gate tapes. Now, I've gone through the transcripts of these tapes very carefully that were published in the tabloid press at the time. And it seems that the conversation was between Diana and a gentleman called Mr. Ogilvy. Now, what's interesting is that when you read the actual substance of what was said, and then you read what the tabloid Fleet Street editors surmised from those conversations, the two things are completely different. The tabloid editors sensationalized the situation and made out that Diana was actually having some rampant love affair with Mr. Ogilvy. And as far as I'm aware, that was not clearly the case. Now, every member of the royal family actually has a secret code word. They have a code name. And, this is useful because obviously you don't want terrorists finding out that, say, for example, Prince Charles or the Queen is actually going to go and visit a certain place. So the code name for the Queen would be used in telephone conversations, and these code names are used as nicknames within the palaces. And this is confirmed by Paul Burrell, who actually worked for the senior royals before he ended up becoming the butler for Princess Diana. The Diana Gate tape does show that Mr. Mr. Gilby is his name. Sorry about that. It's not Ogilvy, it's Gilby. Mr. Gilby used a term, the word squidgy. Squidgy was a term which was used by him to refer to Diana in the tapes. Well, if you read the transcript, it seems to me that it's not, automatically, just because he's used the word squidgy, it doesn't automatically mean that Diana was being unfaithful. It doesn't automatically mean that there was some rampant love affair. They were close friends and they had nicknames for each other. But the Diana Gate tapes were deliberately circulated into the tabloid media to make Diana look as if she was unfaithful. And those tapes must have been recorded by the intelligence services or somebody who had bugged Princess Diana's apartments at Kensington Palace. And after these taped conversations appeared in the press, Diana would actually put on a disguise. She'd put on a headscarf and glasses, and she would actually go to the local high street in Kensington, and she would make phone calls using public telephone boxes, because she was certain that Her Majesty's intelligence services were actually bugging her phone, and the fact that these conversations, these private telephone conversations between Diana and Mr. Gilby came to light in the press proves that Diana was not paranoid. She was not hallucinating. She wasn't, a victim of wild speculation. It proves that people really were spying on Diana. The tapes were obviously recorded by a member of Her Majesty's Secret Services. They were the only people that would have had access to Princess Diana's private telephone line. And we can see from the glum expressions during the trip to Korea that the marriage had been destroyed. It had been destroyed by spies.
I wish to inform the House that Buckingham Palace are at this moment issuing the following statement. It reads as follows. It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
Now, after the bulimia and the ostracisation from the royal family and, the various pressures that have been put on Diana by the media, a lesser person would have been crushed and would have probably faded completely away. But Diana actually proved that she was made of good, solid British upper lip material, and she basically became even more famous, if that could be possible. She travelled around to many, many different hospices, visiting people with AIDS and other various diseases. She really she knew that she was the mother of the future King of England, and rather than going away in a hole and disappearing, which is what I'm sure the senior royals wanted her to do, Diana, you know, she blossomed. She blossomed incredibly and became, I think, every single person's ideal princess.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have it on very good authority that the quest for perfection our society demands can leave the individual gasping for breath at every turn. From early childhood, many had felt they were expected to be perfect, but didn't feel they had the right to express their true feelings to those around them. Feelings of guilt, of self-revulsion, and low personal esteem, creating in them a compulsion to dissolve like a disprin and disappear.
And she was using her charisma and the worldwide media attention to bring a focus on subjects which the royal family, I'm sure, were very annoyed to be brought into the public spotlight. And one of those things was her campaign against the landmines. Very, very huge corporations are involved in the landmine manufacturing business, and the landmine clearing industry. And it's no secret that throughout history, the investment portfolio of various royals have included investments in companies that manufacture landmines, guns and weapons. What then transpired is, after Diana had become even more famous through all these public engagements, is that somebody, obviously with Diana's best interests at heart, somebody who I suspect was working for MI5, the internal intelligence service of Her Majesty's government, actually gave the tabloid media a recorded conversation between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles.
Scandalous, explicit, a right royal shocker. The Charles and Camilla...
It became known as the Tampax tape because at one point the person who seemingly seems to be Prince Charles in these audio recordings says, I wish I was a Tampax, meaning I wish I was, you know, inserted into your vagina. And obviously this created an immense amount of media interest in the relationship between Prince Charles and Camilla, and more people, more members of the public became aware that Camilla had been a love interest, a passionate love interest of Prince Charles long before Diana was on the scene. And the so-called Tampax tape with Charles and Camilla just exasperated the situation. What then happened after Diana had decided to take a back seat and not
be so much in the public eye, which is what she wanted. The tabloid media turned their attentions to Camilla Parker Bowles, and all of a sudden the public were informed in more detail about her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles and the longevity of the relationship, the loving relationship that Camilla Parker Bowles had had with Prince Charles. And it's very, very sad, because Camilla Parker Bowles, shortly before the car crash in Paris that killed Princess Diana, shortly before then, Camilla Parker Bowles was herself involved in a traffic accident in the West Country, near a house in Wiltshire, in England. And it's still an interesting thing. We must cover that in this film, because the car collided and Camilla Parker Bowles fled the scene. Now, there is a law in most countries in Europe that if you're involved in a car accident and there's another person who's been injured, you mustn't leave the scene. You mustn't. You have every responsibility to stay at the scene, call the emergency services if you can. And she fled and she ran into the woods. And I've heard rumours, I don't know whether this is speculation or whatever, but there were rumours that she'd fled into the woods because she felt that she might have been killed, and that possibly that the car crash was actually an orchestrated event. Prince Charles's demeanour and his actions had not been portrayed in a favourable light in the book that had been written by Andrew Morton. And the Dimbleby interview with Prince Charles was designed, I feel, to really put Prince Charles's side of the story across. But on the date that the Dimbleby interview with Prince Charles was broadcast on British television, there was a public function that Diana had been invited to, and she appeared in a fantastic black evening gown and absolutely stunned the world's media, and in a way diffused and took away a lot of public attention away from the broadcast, which I'm sure was designed to rebuild Prince Charles's public image.
Silly Productions present a horror film.
I'll get my own back on him if it's the last thing I do. Yes, I will!
Now, this idea of making a special interview program, which is what Prince Charles had done with one of the Dimbleby brothers, was copied by Diana, and Prince Charles had set the precedent to wear his heart on his sleeve in a publicly broadcast interview.
And Diana basically thought, well, if Prince Charles is going to do that and try and put his side of the story using television, then I shall do the same thing. And what transpired, this is very, very shortly before Diana was murdered, is that the BBC's flagship current affairs weekly program called Panorama showed an incredibly honest and in-depth interview with Diana. Now, in this Panorama interview with Diana, she stated that she would really like to help Great Britain by using her public image to go abroad and support, you know, the work of British charities as some form of ambassador. And that would, if you could imagine such a thing, it would make her even more famous, and that's exactly what she went and did. After the Panorama broadcast, the months leading up to her murder, Princess Diana really stepped up her campaign against landmines, and she visited war zones, ex-war zones, and for the first time, people on the street really understood the damage, the horrendous emotional and physical horror of landmines. Diana met with Muslim people. She hugged and kissed children of the Third World again, which is what she'd done in the past. But this time it was an exercise where she was really using her will, she was using her worldwide public profile to damage the landmine industry, which is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. A landmine can be purchased in bulk for as little as £40. Now, estimates vary, but at the moment we believe that there's something like 20 to 30 million landmines in stock in the world. So, you know, the investment is colossal. If you take the average price of £40 per landmine, times £40 by 25 million, you can see that what Diana was trying to do was to try and really alleviate the suffering that landmines caused, and in doing so bring down an industry worth hundreds of millions of pounds.
Madam,
Yes.
just a picture, madam.
In bad weather, during the rush hour in Paris, I took a taxi ride from the tunnel to the hospital where Diana was finally pronounced dead. According to the British inquest held in the autumn of 2007, the exact route which Diana's ambulance took from the scene of the crash to the hospital is unknown. So, I asked my taxi driver to take what, in his experience, was the shortest and most direct route from the tunnel to the hospital. We left the tunnel at 6 minutes past 4, driving in heavy Parisian rush hour traffic. We took a route through a long underpass. Perhaps these lights were the last images Diana ever saw through the window of the ambulance. Many of these Parisian tunnels are connected to catacombs and other tunnels which traverse the whole of Paris. Along the bank of the Seine, Diana's ambulance travelled, flanked by police motorcycles. According to a Guardian newspaper article published on Wednesday, November the 14th, 2007, the on-board doctor was Jean-Marc Martineau. The ambulance driver's name was Michel Massaboeuf, who claims that the doctor instructed him to drive extra slow because of the condition of the princess. The driver, Michel Massaboeuf, confirms that the ambulance had an escort of several police motorcyclists. Michel Massaboeuf claims that the average speed of the ambulance during the journey was 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. That's approximately 25 to 30 miles per hour. This is approximately the same average speed my taxi travelled from the tunnel to the hospital. Into another underpass, and we quickly make our way to the Petit Salpêtrière Hospital.
which is situated near Gare Austerlitz. At 17 minutes past 4, my taxi arrives in the boulevard of the hospital. My journey, in rush hour traffic, during bad weather, with no police escort, has taken just 11 minutes. Diana's ambulance took more than 1 hour and 40 minutes to do the same journey. According to the ambulance driver, he was ordered by the doctor in the back of the ambulance to stop and park outside the gardens of a natural history museum because Diana was in a critical condition. The ambulance driver claims they parked for just 5 minutes. The hospital entrance, where professional emergency staff had all the latest equipment standing by to help Diana, was actually in view of the parked ambulance. In fact, you can walk from the hospital entrance to the place where the ambulance parked in less than 2 minutes. But no one from the hospital rushed over to the ambulance, even though the place where the ambulance was parked was directly opposite the entrance to the hospital. Why did an 11-minute journey take nearly 2 hours? Mathematically speaking, this means that the ambulance travelled an average of just 2 miles per hour for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Have you ever seen an ambulance travelling at 2 miles per hour with an injured person on board? No witness has come forward confirming that they saw the ambulance and police motorbikes crawling along the road at 2 miles per hour. At such a ridiculously slow average speed, one would expect the exact route to be burned into the memory of the driver. However, Lord Justice Scott Baker told jurors in the British inquest during the autumn of 2007 that the exact route of the ambulance was not known. Here's a question. If you drove at an average speed of just 2 miles per hour on a journey of just a few miles, would you remember the roads which you drove down? Many authors have speculated that it is during this ambulance journey that someone killed Diana, by either refusing her medical attention and literally watching her die in an ambulance parked up on the side of the road, or someone with truly evil intentions made Diana's injuries even worse, possibly cutting and slicing her organs. Out of the sight of the press and the police, out of the sight of the general public, in a long underground underpass, dimly lit, in the privacy of the back of an ambulance, the most famous person in the world was murdered. Once admitted to the hospital, Diana was soon pronounced dead. Then, almost immediately, and against all French laws, a team of embalmers immediately embalmed Diana's body. This makes any post-mortem autopsy difficult to perform. At the same time Diana's body was being illegally embalmed, the tunnel was washed. Yes,
The scene of the most notorious traffic accident of all time, which killed the world's most famous person, was washed down and opened for public use within just a couple of hours of the crash. The scene of the crime was cleansed. The most important body embalmed whilst still warm, and the body of Dodi al-Fayed was burnt, all within 24 hours of the crash. History repeats itself. During this investigation, I asked myself, is there a former historical precedent of a princess being killed in a fake car crash? Surprisingly, I found yes, there is a historical precedent of a princess being killed in a fake car accident. And it also happened in France. On September the 13th, 1982, Princess Grace and Princess Stephanie of Monaco were involved in a terrible car accident. Their rover careered and veered off the winding roads of France, leading to the Principality of Monaco. They were travelling from Roc-Argel to Monaco. Princess Grace was driving. A driver who was following them said that all of a sudden the car carrying the two princesses swerved and zigzagged. Princess Stephanie was able to get out of the car when it finally stopped rolling, and she suffered a few injuries. However, her mother, Princess Grace of Monaco, wasn't so lucky. Princess Grace was found unconscious inside the car. Some people that lived near the site of the accident rescued and took Princess Grace out of the vehicle. An ambulance came and took the princess to the Central Hospital in Monaco. Princess Grace went through a series of studies and a CAT scan. Due to her condition, doctors said nothing else could be done, and her life support system was terminated. On the night of September the 14th, 1982, Princess Grace of Monaco, formerly the American actress Grace Kelly, died. Some authors alleged that this was an act of medical euthanasia or even medical homicide. "15 years after the life support systems of Princess Grace were terminated, a man calling himself Georges Leroux came forward. He alleged that Princess Grace was initiated into a secret society called the Order of the Solar Temple on June 15th, 1982, at the Priory of Villers-Morgon in the south of France. In 1997, a television documentary alleged that Princess Grace of Monaco was the High Priestess of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. The Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple dates back to the so-called Origine Renaissance. This happened on June 12, 1952, when French esoteric author Jacques Breuer and two companions had a mystical experience.
They claimed they were contacted by secret masters of the temple and asked to establish a new Templar Renaissance. This new Templar Renaissance eventually materialized as a new French secret society, and this was named the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. It was established on June the 24th, 1966, and incorporated under Monaco law in 1967. The French Principality of Monaco was selected by this secret society because the Grand Master, Jean-Louis Marsan, was a Monaco socialite and friend of Princess Grace of Monaco. According to various TV documentaries, there was more than one version of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. Princess Grace of Monaco gave millions and millions of dollars to the Solar Temple. However, she soon became disillusioned with the teachings of this secret society. The Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple was eventually led by a man called Dimambro. Monsieur Dimambro convinced his recruits that he was in touch with 33 spiritual masters who watched over the whole world from a base in the Himalayas. He also told the followers of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple that they were reincarnated from biblical figures or saints. Princess Grace of Monaco was asked to donate $10 million to the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. She paid them $9 million, but soon had second thoughts about paying the rest. A schism broke out amongst the leadership of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. Shortly after, Princess Grace of Monaco was involved in a mysterious car accident in France and died in hospital. After Princess Grace of Monaco's life support system was turned off, her body was laid out in the palace chapel, and mourners from all over the world visited to pay their respects. Sent on her first ever public engagement, representing the British royal family alone, a young British teenage girl stared into the face of the dead Princess Grace of Monaco. She was staring at a princess who had been killed by a car crash in mysterious circumstances. That young British teenage girl was Diana, who, 15 years later, would also be a princess who would die in a car crash in mysterious circumstances in France.
according to the fragments that Mr. Trevor Rhys-Jones has remembered, there wasn't excessive speeding, and there wasn't certainly a drunken driver at the wheel. But there is some interesting things that have come forward since this whole tragic event happened regarding what Mr. Henri Paul used to do to earn a bit of extra cash.
Well, there's certainly plenty of evidence now to suggest that Henri Paul was an asset of both British and French intelligence. We know he was working for the DST, which is the French internal intelligence, equivalent in many respects to Britain's MI5, because he had DST phone contact numbers in his address book. They found those after his death. So we know he was working for French intelligence, but the evidence seems to suggest he was working for British intelligence as well. Richard Tomlinson has stated he's seen files with, he thinks was Henri Paul's name,
yes,
working for MI6. And it stands to reason anyway that MI6 would have targeted someone like Henri Paul in his position at such a prestigious hotel as the Ritz.
Lots of VIPs.
Exactly, and he was deputy head of security there.
Now,
so
what we're saying though is we're not saying that Henri Paul was a full-time agent.
No.
It's more a case where from time to time he would be asked to give forward information on various VIPs that were staying at the Ritz.
Exactly, even if it's just down to what time their flights are, where are they going to, what's their destination, where have they come from, who have they met, that kind of thing. You know, these are top industrialists, business people, etc., financiers staying at the Ritz all of the time. So yeah, he could have been very useful in that role. You know, the evidence certainly suggests that he would have been at least, like you say, a part-time asset of British intelligence as well as French intelligence.
Now, it's been revealed that fairly large sums of money were in Henri Paul's possession in various bank accounts, and I believe that his normal annual salary was the equivalent of about £20,000 a year.
It was equivalent to about £20,000 a year.
But how much money was found in the various bank accounts that he owned?
In total, around £170,000 deposited in cash, largely in deposits of around about £4,000, which is about the legal limit in France. If you deposit cash deposits of say 8, 9, 10, 11, 12,000 pounds, then there's an immediate inquiry. The bank is kind of obliged to inform the police about that. So all of these cash deposits are just below the legal threshold in France. In the last 8 months of his life, he deposited around £40,000 to £44,000 in cash, when he's only earning £20,000 a year. So that's more than double his salary. Now,
he'd have to save up really hard, wouldn't he?
Well, pretty much. You'd think so, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's fairly obvious from the people I've spoken to anyway. Most intelligence operatives. Richard Tomlinson himself has said that is standard procedure. David Shaler has said it's standard procedure. My contacts have said standard procedure to pay someone around about £2,000 or £3,000 in cash for services rendered. It's fairly consistent.
Well, when we're talking about cash in plain envelopes, of course, Henri Paul's employer, Mohammed Al Fayed, did actually prove, and actually testified in a court case that not only Henri Paul was willing to take cash, but also British MPs were willing to take cash in the famous Cash for Questions case.
Indeed.
This rumour about Henri Paul being an alcoholic. I find that interesting because when they went to his apartment and they looked in his fridge, he was the only thing that he seemed to ever be addicted to was Coca-Cola.
Indeed. When they autopsied him as well, they found that his liver was perfectly healthy. There was no signs of him being an alcoholic whatsoever. And also the ridiculously high levels of carbon monoxide they found in his blood. 20.7% carbon monoxide poisoning. Even 4 days after his death, when a second sample was tested, there was still close on 13% carbon monoxide poisoning in his blood. Now, even the heaviest of smokers, you would expect to find no more than perhaps at the maximum 10%, and he wasn't a heavy smoker. We know that Henri Paul smoked a few cigarillos each day, but by heavy smoker we're talking at least 20 to 30 cigarettes a day to kind of get the levels even those levels, like 8 to 10% we're talking about, not 13 and 20%, which were found in Henri Paul's blood.
Now, where did the carbon monoxide come from, if indeed it did exist in the blood? As far as I understand it, am I not right in saying that there was this disinformation campaign regarding the airbags?
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
And people started stating in the press that the airbag was full of carbon monoxide. Is that true?
Indeed, yeah. The French inquiry found, when they concluded the inquiry, they found that, or they put forward their conclusion was that Henri Paul had this amount of carbon monoxide in his blood due to a combination of smoking and the airbag splitting on impact and him taking in a huge lungful of carbon monoxide. Well, if they'd have bothered to phone up Mercedes-Benz and find out, is there any chance of there being carbon monoxide in your airbags, they would have found out that there is, for obvious reasons, Mercedes do not put carbon monoxide in their airbags. So there was no chance of it being the airbag. Even Britain's foremost crash expert, Professor Murray Mackay, who I interviewed personally at Birmingham University, just laughed at that conclusion. He said it's absolute nonsense because it's known that there is no carbon monoxide in Mercedes airbags.
So as far as that point is concerned, we can say that whoever wrote that part of the French report had either not done their research, or that person was playing their role in this general disinformation campaign that said that Henri Paul was an alcoholic, or he was drunk when he went into the car, Henri Paul was speeding. The French report itself is a question, isn't it? Especially as far as Henri Paul is concerned.
It's a joke. It's a complete joke. Yeah, I think a complete whitewash, and I think that's what it was designed to be from the outset.
Does anyone at all know where he was before he turned up for work that night?
Well, it's a complete mystery, a complete and utter mystery.
Not even any of his close friends? Or
nobody knows where he was. There are a couple of reports that have been put forward, but he was working all day. He was there at Le Bourget Airport to pick Diana and Dodi up in the afternoon, but he left work at 7 o'clock, presumably thinking that was his day finished. So Dodi Fayed called Henri Paul, or got the Ritz manager to call Henri Paul back on duty at 10 o'clock in the evening. But between those hours of 7 and 10 in the evening, nobody knows where Henri Paul was. A couple of people, including Richard Tomlinson again, have suggested he was probably meeting up with his intelligence handlers. Also, Gerald Posner, a very high-profile investigative journalist in America, says that his NSA contact said very definitely that Henri Paul met up with his French intelligence handler during those hours. So, but there is no solid, tangible evidence of where Henri Paul was between 7 and 10 that night.
Well, all we can do is speculate. I mean, my hunch about it is that, we know that Henri Paul had these amounts in his bank account, and nobody on £20,000 a year could save up that amount of money without being the world's best saver. And my hunch is that lost 3-hour period, being a Frenchman, he would have probably had dinner around 7 o'clock, but then he would have probably received an instruction, probably another payment, and my speculation is that would have been an instruction to take a particular route.
I think that as well. That all the evidence that we have managed to gather
Drive
suggests
car
that that's the case.
in a particular way, down a particular road.
Yeah, down the route that he went, because there's no other explanation really as to why he would have taken that route. It was driving completely away from Dodie's apartment, which was his destination. And he was found with an envelope full of money on him that night. You know, he had the equivalent of around $2,500 in his pocket on that night. Again, consistent with a payoff, indeed. So, you know, given within the context of the whole plot, it would seem that Henri Paul was with his intelligence handler that night, receiving final instruction and payment.
Okay, so what we're dealing with then is the car being driven not at high speed, not by a person who was obviously off his face on alcohol, but it was being driven by somebody that had connections to the intelligence services and most probably took bribes and probably took instructions immediately before they left the Ritz Hotel.
I think so, yeah.
When you wrote your book with John Beveridge, you actually did some research and discovered that certain techniques exist for assassinating people, and in recent years, I think you say in your book that in, say, the last 20 years, it's sort of become kind of the in way of killing somebody is by organising a car accident.
Yeah, well, we wanted to look into that because obviously if this was an assassination, then we thought, like everybody else probably, to begin with, at the very beginning, that this was a bit of a chancy way to assassinate somebody, you know. I mean, put a bullet through their head, they're dead. Car crash, they could possibly survive. And so we looked into that and to see if we could find any other instances, and we found several instances. I suppose the most high-profile instance we found of another assassination by road traffic accident was an incident reported by Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Now, Sir Ranulph Fiennes is a personal friend of Prince Charles. He's the world-famous explorer, but he's also a former SAS officer. And he revealed that in a book he wrote a long time ago, that back in as long ago as 1986, he reported an incident of an assassination by a road traffic accident. And he reported or revealed that this technique is known as the Boston breaks because it was developed by the SAS in Boston in northern England, where the SAS is based. And it effectively involves inserting a little microchip transceiver that overrides the steering and the brakes, and so that the car can be remotely controlled. Now, I know this sounds all a little bit James Bond at first hearing, but just, you know, we can fly probes to Mars and back by remote control. We fly, you know, highly sophisticated spy planes at 60,000 feet without pilots, you know, by remote control. We can certainly take over a car with the right equipment and drive that car remotely. And all the evidence seems to suggest that that's what happened that night.
Now, if I can just point out then, because Sir Ranulph Fiennes has written many books and he's quite a well-known ex-military character.
Yes, he is.
Are you saying that Sir Ranulph Fiennes, he used to work for the SAS?
He was a SAS officer, yeah.
He is an acquaintance of Prince Charles.
He is indeed.
And that the organisation that Sir Ranulph Fiennes used to work for, the SAS, in the past have developed this technique of remotely controlling a car in order to create a car accident that could kill someone.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Now, this gentleman, this is also covered in your book. I find this very interesting. This is Air Marshal Sir Peter Horsley, former equerry to the Queen.
Yeah.
He's now dead.
He is now dead, yeah.
Now, Air Marshal Sir Peter Horsley confirmed that the Boston breaks method of assassination has been used in Britain, and that he was personally, though unwittingly, involved in an operation that used this so-called Boston Breaks technique.
That's right.
What on earth happened there?
Well, it was the car that Sir Peter Horsley was driving.
Mm-hmm.
This is all according to Sir Peter Horsley. People can buy his book and read this for themselves.
It's called
Sounds from Another Room, yeah. And he was driving his car along the A303 in England, close to Stonehenge, when he noticed a Volvo Estate closing on him in his rearview mirror very, very quickly. So he kind of moved over to allow this car to overtake him, but as it overtook him, he noticed his car, he completely lost control of his car, and he felt that it was taken over completely. Mm-hmm. The next thing he knows, he's swerving one way, then another way, back violently across the central reservation, smack into what was obviously the target vehicle, which was driven by a character called Major Michael Marmon, who was the target. And Michael Marmon was killed in this accident. Sir Peter Horsley was very seriously injured, but he survived. But what's also interesting about that particular incident, Chris, is that it's the way in which Sir Peter Horsley's car moved when it was taken over,
yes.
Because it is identical to what happened to the Mercedes in which Diana died, in that the minute Sir Peter Horsley lost control, the minute Henri Paul lost control, exactly the same thing happened. The car swerved first one way, then the other way, and then back, in Henri Paul's case, into the 13th pillar in that Almont underpass.
Yes.
In Sir Peter Horsley's case, across the central reservation and into the target car. But if you watch computer-generated reconstructions of the crash, certainly Diana's crash, you see specific movement of that car. It's not just taken over and then suddenly it's driven into the pillar. It moves in a very specific way, and it is identical to the way in which Sir Peter Horsley's car was manoeuvred once it was taken over.
Is coming along this road on the left bank of the Seine towards the Alma Bridge. It heads down towards the underpass, and it's estimated at that time its speed's about 70 miles an hour. What happens next is based on the evidence that we have so far. As he comes down into the tunnel, he's faced with a slow-moving Fiat. He steers to the left. Because he's just come over a crest, the steering's light, he probably puts in too much steering, so he's heading towards the centre columns. He corrects right, and now he's heading directly for the Fiat Uno.
The Mercedes sideswiped the Fiat, snapping off its own driving mirror and smashing the Fiat's tail light. So far, just a minor collision. A 106-foot skin mark shows that the Mercedes driver pulled the steering wheel back to the left. Then the car mounted the pavement and smashed head-on into column 13. The car spun round and ended up facing in the direction it had come from. It's thought that the Fiat drove by without stopping.
From the time the car entered the tunnel until it came to rest after the impact, that's only about 2 seconds. Newspapers have talked luridly of speeds of 120 miles an hour, but looking at the damage tells a very different story. It suggests an impact with the pillar of about 60 miles an hour. And we know that the car came to rest about 15 feet from the pillar, spinning out, and that means about 10 miles an hour exit speed from the pillar. So the change in velocity was slightly less than 50 miles an hour. And it's that change in velocity which is crucial in terms of the severity of the crash to which the occupants were exposed. This was a severe but a survivable accident, and what we now need to consider is why did 3 people die? Strangely, Princess Diana, sitting where I am in the right rear, had the best chance of survival because the impact was concentrated on the left front of the car, and as it hit the pillar, It also rotated and span out, so she went partly past the pillar and didn't have quite the same crash forces applied to her as happens to the people sitting on the left. If she'd been wearing a seatbelt, she'd have had a fair chance of surviving even this extreme accident. But, unbelted, she was thrown forward to strike the back of the front passenger seat, the door pillar, and then was tossed around after the main accident took place and the vehicle span out.
Apparently, some people have said that the slip road that gives anybody coming towards the tunnel an option of either going through the tunnel or taking the slip road, that particular slip road, apparently, according to some people that saw this, was actually blocked by a motorbike. Do you want to elaborate on that?
It's definitely acknowledged in Lord Stephen's report as well that there was a motorbike parked broadside across the slip road off of the road, as you say. So Henri Paul was unable to
he had no
take
choice.
he had no choice but to go through the tunnel. In order to get back to Dodie's apartment, he needed to take that slip road off. So it wasn't just an option; it was a necessary one. He should have taken that. Given the fact that he'd gone this wrong way, as it were, the way back to Dodie's apartment was to take this slip road off of the road he was on. But he couldn't. Now, what Lord Stephen says is that Henri Paul was going too fast anyway, so that's why he didn't take it, even though the report does acknowledge that this motorbike was parked broadside across there, blocking his way. And it's not true to say Henri Paul was going too fast. The reason he sped up and carried on through the tunnel is precisely because this motorbike was blocking his path off of the road.
Now, am I right in saying that there were no witnesses at all to the actual moment when the Mercedes smashed into the pillar?
Aside from those who caused the crash, there were no witnesses at all. No, there's a fair number of witnesses to events immediately after and over the first few minutes after the crash, but there were no public witnesses to the crash itself.
But there are certainly witnesses who saw what was going on at the mouth, the entrance to the tunnel.
Yeah.
One of those is a gentleman called Mr. Hunter.
Gary Hunter was staying in a hotel kind of overlooking the exit route from the tunnel. He couldn't quite see the tunnel from his bedroom window, but what he did see was immediately after the crash. He heard 2 explosions in the tunnel. He was interested. He looked out of his window, couldn't quite see the tunnel from his window, but what he did see a few seconds later was a small Fiat Uno type car. It was very dark, remember, for him, and he was looking down, but he saw a Fiat Uno type car followed bumper to bumper by a Mercedes, he said, speeding away from the tunnel as though they were really, really trying to get away from someone. This is a London lawyer. This is not someone who's just, making up stories. He was there.
Now, what I find so interesting about that is that there's a direct contradiction as far as the movements of that white Fiat Uno. Let's say it definitely was a white Fiat Uno, because there's one report of the white Fiat Uno virtually at a standstill, loitering at the entrance to the tunnel, and then there's Mr. Hunter saying that after the crash, and obviously those explosions that he heard, I would imagine are the amplified sounds in a closed-in space of the car going into the pillar. And it seems that the Uno was loitering almost at a standstill at the entrance, and then just a few seconds later it was seen speeding off.
Indeed, yeah.
And I am right in saying, aren't I, that neither the car nor the person driving that car has ever been positively
identified or traced. No, that's absolutely right. And also interestingly, moments before that, the Fiat Uno was seen loitering at the entrance to the tunnel. It was seen by an off-duty police officer speeding towards the tunnel. So what had happened was the Fiat Uno had sped towards the tunnel at quite some speed, overtaking the off-duty police officer en route. A few moments later, as the off-duty police officer, David Laurent, approached the tunnel, he saw the same Fiat Uno that had come to what he called a virtual standstill at the tunnel, like you say, loitering at the entrance there. And then half a minute after the crash, Gary Hunter saw the same car speeding away from...
Now that's not normal driving, is it?
It's not normal driving, and when we interviewed Professor Murray Mackay, that's a precise phrase he used almost. He said there was some very abnormal driving that night with regard to the Fiat Uno itself, because you imagine if you're coming into the Almar tunnel, the crash tunnel, Diana's Mercedes comes up behind you, it clips your rear wing, you're in a tiny little Fiat Uno.
There's paint from an Uno on the Mercedes.
On the Mercedes, so we know, and it's acknowledged in both the French and the British reports that the Mercedes clipped the Uno on the way in. You're hit by a ton of speeding Mercedes.
4 tons of
Okay, 4 tons of speeding Mercedes in a little tin can Fiat Uno. 2 seconds later, that Mercedes crashes full on into a pillar in front of you, spins around 180 degrees in front of you, and you have the presence of mind not to make any kind of correction manoeuvre that would leave a skid mark on the road. You wouldn't put your foot on the brakes. You just carry on. This is the Uno driver. There were no tyre marks or skid marks made by the Fiat Uno.
And then Mr. Hunter sees that car
speeding away from the tunnel about a half a minute later.
Now, would you say that, you know, judging on all the other things that have come forward and us putting this instant ball together, that would it be likely that perhaps the person who was remotely controlling the Mercedes, if indeed the Boston Bricks method was being used, might likely have been sitting in that white Fiat Uno?
I think that is almost definitely the case, yeah, I would say so.
And no members of the public actually saw the impact of the Mercedes hit the pillar?
No. No one's come forward to say so.
But the person inside the Fiat Uno would most certainly have had the best view of that incident.
Absolutely, because it happened right in front of his eyes.
It is absolute black and white, horrendous murder.
We turn our attention to some interesting characters that just happened to be either stationed or just happened by chance to be in Paris that night.
Okay.
As far as I'm aware, there were some people with connections to the British establishment in terms of MI5 or MI6, and they were in Paris that night. Do you want to just give us a little list of all these interesting characters that all of a sudden seemed to be in Paris the same night that Diana was killed?
Well, we certainly know that 2 characters called Richard Spearman and Nicholas Langman were in Paris that night at the British Embassy. We now know for sure. There were always kind of speculations that they were MI6 officers. We now know for certain they were MI6 officers. In fact, Richard Spearman was formerly private secretary to the chief of MI6, so he was a very senior MI6 officer at the embassy that night.
So one of Britain's most senior MI6 officers was at the British Embassy the night that Diana died.
Indeed, yeah.
Am I right in also saying that there were extremely senior French officials actually in the tunnel?
Yes, there were. Yeah, we know that the chief of police was there. Some very, very senior French officials arrived at the tunnel.
And we presume that they were called because they were told a VIP has crashed, and they rushed to the scene.
Yeah.
Well, Paris is full of VIPs. Some of the world's most famous people actually permanently reside in Paris. So I can only presume that they were told specifically, this is Princess Diana.
Yeah, I would think so.
She's a British royal and it's a very serious situation, so they went to the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
But am I right in saying that at the British Embassy, which has a special communications room like all embassies do, there was a person that requested one of the staff to leave the communications
indeed,
room.
yeah.
Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. There was, according to the wireless operator who was in the communications room that night, who reported that everything was a buzz because they knew perfectly well Diana was there, obviously, even though in the official report now we're told that the British Embassy had no knowledge of Diana's presence in Paris until after the accident, which is complete nonsense, of course. But yes, this wireless operator says that two old Etonian type, very well-spoken English characters burst into the communications room and told everybody to get out at about just before Diana and Dodie left the Ritz. They were told to get out. And this particular wireless operator named one of those characters as Lord Fellows, who is the husband of Diana's sister, formerly Sir Robert Fellows, who is the husband of Diana's sister, Lady Jane Fellows, and at the time of Diana's death, he was the Queen's private secretary. So what he was doing at the British Embassy, clearing out the communications room, I don't know.
Yes.
It must be said at this point, Lord Fellows has been questioned on that, and he's denied, obviously, that he was there. But nonetheless, this person's testimony is that he was there, and you have to ask yourself why someone would make up such a story.
Yes. Or, you know, to give it the situation the benefit of the doubt, it could be a case of complete mistaken identity.
Could be, or it could be the case that Lord Fellows got his weekends wrong because he said he was in Norfolk that weekend. Who knows?
James Danson, a member of the French paparazzi, apparently a man who's made quite a lot of money from selling photographs of VIPs and royalty to various magazines and newspapers. We've made a little list here. He's a well-known royal paparazzo and alleged part-time MI6 agent. James and Danson owned a Fiat Uno, identical to the one involved in the crash. He confessed, or some people say he boasted, to some of his friends that he was actually in the tunnel when the crash happened, and that he took some highly compromising photographs of the crashed Mercedes.
Indeed, yeah. We know indeed that he'd spent the summer photographing Diana and Dodie anyway, specifically.
And that was on the yacht Jean.
He'd been on the Monaco, he'd been to Corsica, he'd been in the south of France, he'd been all over just photographing Diana and Dodie, and he was actually compiling a photographic record that he was planning to turn into a book later on.
He did actually, this is really for sure, he did own a Fiat Uno.
He definitely owned a Fiat Uno, a white Fiat Uno that forensically matched the Fiat Uno that was involved in the crash.
And he boasted to his friends that he was in the tunnel.
He did, but he said he was on his motorbike, which is what he normally did. But that's interesting because there are several motorbikes seen in the tunnel as well.
Now this gentleman is dead, isn't he? What happened to him shortly after all this happened? I think within 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah, indeed. He was found in his burnt-out BMW in a secluded wood, 400 miles from where he was supposed to be that day, with a bullet hole in his head.
And
the car was locked from the outside. They've never found the keys. And the verdict, of course, was suicide. So, and then, of course, just a few days after his death was made public, the CIPA press agency in Paris was broken into by a gang of 3 armed men.
This is a press agency that receives photos from paparazzi.
Yeah, and they shot the security guard and stole James Anderson's photographic archive.
And did that include the photos that he'd taken prior to...
Well, we don't know, because the photographs were never recovered.
Oh, I see.
But one must assume that that's quite possible, yeah.
I mean, he boasted to his friends that he had some photographs of the actual crash.
Of the actual crash and of who was actually in the tunnel immediately after the crash.
And then the agency that he supplied photos to was broken into and their archives were stolen.
Indeed. In fact, on the very day he died in his burnt-out car in the south of France, he was supposed to be at a meeting at the CIPA press agency that day, where the person he was meeting was supposed to be buying photographs from him.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that he'd boasted, or that he'd written into his diary, whether this is true or not, but it is said that he made an entry in his diary saying that he had actually spent some time on board the Monaco.
That's right, yeah.
Taking photographs, one presumes, and that this had been an arrangement mutually agreed between himself and Diana.
That's right, yeah. I mean, he was very close to the royals. He'd taken a lot of photographs of the royals. He took what's now a very, very famous photograph, for example, of Prince Charles kissing the royal nanny, Tiggy Leg Bork, that fetched him about £100,000 for that photograph alone, that one alone. So this is some of the evidence that's thrown into the pot to suggest the fact that he was working closely with the royals, and because he was, year after year after year, he was able to pass information back to his MI6 handlers on their whereabouts, their movements, etc., etc. What we know is he was almost certainly in the tunnel. What we know is he witnessed the crash, he took photos of the crash, he took photos of whoever was there immediately after the crash. He must have seen that Fiat Uno, whether he was driving it or not. He must have seen who was on the motorbike that overtook the Mercedes immediately before it crashed. So he had some very compromising photographs. Whether or not he was a part-time informant, paid informant for MI6, that's likely. But whether he was actually a hired assassin and actually driving that car, I don't think so. I don't think that was his car. I don't think it needed to be his car. You know, he's just someone that I think a lot of focus has been...
Do you think that James Danson's reputation is being used, setting him up as a scapegoat?
Yeah, I would say that's a very likely scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Do you think that Diana, in really going against the military-industrial complex, as it's known in America, would provide a motive strong enough for certain people to try and kill her, to stop her from continuing this landmine campaign?
I think certainly, yeah. I think that certainly a motive enough to involve, say for example, the CIA in what I believe was already an MI6 plot to kill her. But yeah, I mean the very fact that she alone persuaded then President Clinton to effectively U-turn on US defence policy and agree to sign the landmines treaty. I mean, she persuaded President Clinton to sign the landmines treaty on her own. And people look at landmines and say, well, you know, landmines, but you know, the amount of landmines in the world, 200 million deployed around the world, another 200 million stockpiled, ready for use. She was also, there was also talk of other mines, anti-tank mines coming into the whole equation, not to mention the airborne mines, the cluster bombs that have been used in both Gulf, you know, the Gulf War to begin with and now the Iraq War. We're talking billions and billions of dollars. And what next? What next? If she could persuade the President of the United States to, you know, defy the American defence industry, then what else, you know, what else was she capable of? So well, yeah, I think that was enough to interest the CIA. Yes. Because the note that Diana wrote, everyone assumed at the time when that note was published that she was referring to Camilla when she said that her husband was planning an accident in her car in order to make the path clear for him to marry everyone put Camilla on the end of that note in their minds. But actually, the woman Diana was referring to was Tiggy Leg Bork, and Diana was this is in this note and in the note she lodged with her lawyer. Tiggy Leg Bork is named, and Diana's fear was that both herself and Camilla were on the government hit list in order to make the path clear for Charles to marry Tiggy Leg Bork. Now, just one small instance there that is very interesting is, 10 years ago now, I was told very specifically that there had been an assassination attempt on Camilla Parker Bowles. And interestingly enough, that assassination attempt had taken the form of a road traffic accident. Camilla had survived a near-fatal car crash just about 6 weeks before Diana's own car crash claimed her life. So there's something in what Diana was fearing there. There's more to this note than meets the eye immediately, even though it's very interesting anyway. But there's more to it even than that. I've spoken to a lot of sources during my investigation, and my initial sources, my initial MI5 source and another source I was introduced to by that person, told me very clearly that Diana's death was the result of the failure to assassinate Camilla Parker Bowles.
It's now transpired that people that Diana presumably considered as being very, very close friends have very, very strong connections to MI5 and MI6. One of those people is Rosa Monckton. Can you tell us about Rosa Monckton?
Well, she's a very interesting character, Rosa Monckton. Yeah, I mean, she kind of somehow became Diana's, probably her most, certainly publicly speaking, her closest confidant, in the public eye. And I think she did get very close to her. But what's interesting with regard to her connections to the intelligence community is that the Monktons really are pretty much a British spy family. That's pretty well known. Rosa's grandfather was pretty much a government agent. He was advisor and confidant to Edward VIII during the abdication crisis, keeping an eye on the errant king. Rosa's brother, Anthony Monckton, has recently been outed as a very senior MI6 officer. According to Mohammed Al-Fayed, Rosa's other brother, Christopher, is also a very senior MI6 officer. Rosa's husband, Dominic Lawson, editor of the Sunday Telegraph, has been accused in the press and in Parliament of providing cover for MI6 officers and having connections to MI6. So I think for Rosa to just plainly deny any connection at all to MI6, which she did in the Lord Stevens report, is a little difficult to swallow, really.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we know that this now was definitely written by Diana, because a second note has recently come to light, which was lodged with her lawyer at the time, which is pretty much a replica of that, with a lawyer called Lord Mishcon. Yeah. So we know that was what she was saying, and that she was fearful that she was going to die in an accident. Don't forget, of course, that we mustn't forget that she really, really believed that her former lover, Sergeant Barry Mannicky, who was her bodyguard at one point,
this chap here, this is Barry Mannicky,
yeah. That he was killed in a he was killed in a road traffic accident, but Diana was convinced that was an MI5 operation that killed him. And she was also always fearful of dying in a similar way, as this note shows. And like you say, it's chillingly prognostic. There are a few things really, but I guess most notably is the fact that this Mercedes was stolen prior to the accident. Now,
do you know how
it was stolen? Yeah, well, it was stolen by an armed gang of three, at gunpoint, which is perhaps if you're in the trade of buying and selling stolen cars, then a Mercedes S280 is worth stealing. But this car was found a few days later with nothing missing, nothing wrong with it except the little microchip, effectively the car's computer that certainly controls the car's steering and brakes. Now, also on the night of the accident, we're told that, and this is official as well, according to the conclusion of Lord Stephen's Operation Paget report, that this car was the only available car. But we're told it was the only available car, the very car that had been stolen. Its EMS, electronic management system chip, taken out, and then the car returned. Who actually repaired that car? Who replaced that chip? We still don't know.
So there is a definite possibility then that this technique that had been developed, some years previously by the SAS might very well be the exact way that this Mercedes was controlled, by taking that chip on this, staged gunpoint raid on the car.
Absolutely,
and taking it away. In that period, we see the chip being replaced, which could be a modified chip according to specifications of the SAS or...
That's exactly what it would have been. According to, I also personally interviewed a former SAS sergeant called Dave Cornish, and he looked at this, and I put this theory to him, and he said, absolutely, that is exactly how it would have been done. They would have stolen the car, taken one chip out, replaced it with another, no one would have known, that's exactly how it would have been done, according to Dave Cornish, Sergeant David Cornish.
Now, what happened to the offer from Mercedes-Benz engineers?
Yeah, they were refused permission to go anywhere near the wreck.
Who refused them?
The French authorities. No, they were refused permission. So
because, Mercedes are renowned as one of the world's greatest
Absolutely.
car manufacturers.
Absolutely.
The car itself is the top of the range S-Class. Like you say, a 500 and a 600 is the top of the S-Class range. This is one of the best cars in the world, built by a professional company that was offering, I presume, for free, the expertise of
its own engineers, and they were refused permission.
Do you think, it's fair to speculate that the reason that Mercedes-Benz have never been allowed access to the crash is because they know that car inside out? Obviously, they are the company that designed it and manufactured it, and that there had been these modifications, and that Mercedes-Benz are deliberately being kept away from it because probably one of their engineers would pick up on something that was not put in that car at the time when it was manufactured in the factory.
Absolutely. And a very similar scenario, according to Sir Ranulph Fiennes again, with Sir Peter Horsley incident. That's exactly what happened in that situation as well. The police were not allowed near that car until, according to Sir Ranulph Fiennes, this is not conspiracy theory, this is Sir Ranulph Fiennes saying this, the team that carried out the assassination made sure that their men got to the car before the police were able to examine it in a very similar way to this. You would expect that Mercedes-Benz engineers would have been allowed to come in and give their opinion on the condition of the car, but they weren't allowed to.
Well, thanks to the subscribers of the Enigma channel, we were able to find and purchase a Mercedes S-Class. It's an S280. It's exactly the same model and exactly the same year of manufacture as the car involved in the crash. The only difference with this car is that the steering wheel is on the opposite side because this is a British version. But apart from that, this is exactly the same vehicle. Now, we've had this car for nearly 2 years. We've been able to do a lot of driving tests. We've gone through the tunnel many times in this car, and it's given me a lot of insights, and I've never seen a documentary where they've gone to the trouble of actually purchasing an S-Class for the research in the actual film. This car cost €100,000 new. That's about £76,000, I think, roughly. It's bought by dictators, VIPs, footballers' wives, prime ministers, anyone who wants a rugged, sturdy vehicle. The build quality is the best that Mercedes have to offer. There is nothing above the S-Class apart from the Maybach, which is a different company which is run by Mercedes altogether. The general build quality of this car exceeds what you would find in a Bentley and also in a Rolls-Royce. The doors have a self-closing mechanism. This really creates a hermetic seal around the door frame, and this adds to the rigidity of the framework of the actual car. And there is an interesting sequence in a film starring George Clooney called The Peacemaker, where they take a Mercedes S-Class, exactly the same car as this, and they punish the car incredibly, and you can see that in the car it stands up to a huge amount of abuse. And the storyline in the plot of the Peacemaker film is that the S-Class is being used by special operatives, by intelligence agents.
Oh shit!
That briefcase, pull out an extra magazine.
Where is it?
In the briefcase, reach it.
God damn it!
Seatbelt.
What are you doing?
Well, what I have to say after spending nearly 2 years driving this car is that you do need some experience to handle a car of this size. Many of my friends have taken it for a spin, and they've been absolutely gobsmacked at the huge size of this vehicle. It's difficult to judge gaps, it's difficult to park, it's difficult to get into a garage, and in my investigation I've been unable to ascertain whether Henri Paul had experience of driving the S-Class Mercedes. What I can say is that the car that was in the crash was supplied by an organisation called Étoile Limousines, and Étoile Limousines have had a very close working relationship with the Ritz Hotel. On the night of the crash, apparently, this is according to certain reports which I've read and researched, on the night of the crash, the Mercedes S280 limousine in question was the only car available to ferry Dodi and Diana to Dodi's apartment. And it's interesting because you would imagine that there would be other cars available, but apparently it was this one, this S280, which was the only one which was available. Well, many people have sort of speculated that the Mercedes was tampered with and rigged in some way. And in parts of this film we discuss the so-called Boston brakes method, which was developed by certain people working for the SAS. So, you know, this was another reason why I took the decision to purchase an exact model so that we could do our own tests. And we looked under the hood and we found some interesting things. Now, many of the mechanisms in this car are all controlled electronically by an engine management system and an electronics management system. And I have it on good authority from experienced Mercedes mechanics that you could modify this car. In actual fact, you can modify any car using hydraulically controlled piston rods attached to the steering assembly, and then by the use of remote control technology, which you find on model aeroplanes and model racing cars, you can control the hydraulic piston rods, but they would have to have their own additional power source, or you would have to suck power from the existing battery in the car. Whatever modification you wanted in terms of being able to remotely control the steering and the brakes of a car, you would have to drill into parts of the car and you would have to add extra control rods. As far as I've been told, it's not possible to control the actual existing electronic system remotely without having some kind of physical modification. So when we purchased this car, we did an internal inspection, and immediately what struck us is that the whole engine layout is very, very logical and extremely clear. Here you have your water supply, the battery, the radiator is all in an enclosed enclosure. There's not that many wires dangling around. The hoses are all moulded in their own separate enclosures. In actual fact, everything here, the covers for the lights, they have little light emblems so that you know that this is how you change the bulb. This is the water windscreen wiper fluid filler, and you can see that there are emblems all over the car. Things are clearly marked. There's labels telling you what everything is, and it's interesting that Mercedes engineers were point blankly refused access to inspect the wreckage of the car which was carrying Diana, and I believe that's because if you were to drill any new parts into this engine, if you were to add anything at all, an experienced Mercedes engineer would immediately be able to detect that there'd been a modification. And even somebody without any specialist Mercedes mechanical training would be able to tell that these specifically designed components, which are all constructed and laid out in a very, very logical manner, even somebody with a mild amount of mechanical knowledge would be able to detect a part which should not be there. And that is why I believe that Mercedes engineers have been refused access to the wreckage to this day. And their offer was refused immediately after the crash, and still for the last 10 years the wreck has not been given over to Mercedes. Well, I've driven this Mercedes for nearly 2 years, and when I saw the photographs of the crash blown up so that we could really analyse the wreckage as it was photographed by the world's media as it sat in the tunnel before it got whisked away, I just found it difficult to believe that the metalwork, the very, very thick metalwork that this car is made of, would just fold up like a crisp packet. I mean, there's obviously a very big difference between this S-Class Mercedes and something like a Renault Twingo. And the reason that people pay a lot of money for, you know, the S-Class Mercedes and Range Rovers and Bentleys is because they want a lot of, you know, robust construction around them as they're driving. People pick these cars for the safety aspect. And my feeling is that the Mercedes was weakened. I feel that the structure of the Mercedes was probably partly drilled, partly sawn through across the roof section and across the bonnet area there, and that I don't believe that the impact was, you know, 100 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour even. I think that the impact probably took place when the car was running at maybe 45, 50, 55, 60 miles an hour maximum. Now we do know that the Mercedes was stolen several weeks before, and that if you know, the various reports vary that you read, but apparently one of the doors was removed, and the microchip which manages the electronics for the engine system was also taken, was also stolen. Well, those chips can be bought on eBay, and various Mercedes parts companies make those chips available. It has a retail value of about £120. Now, it makes you wonder why somebody would bother stealing the car at gunpoint while there was somebody driving the car in the centre of Paris just to steal a £120 microchip, which they could buy from eBay. Well, I'm actually sitting in the same position that Diana sat in when she left in the Mercedes from the rear entrance of the Ritz Hotel. And according to the official Lord Stevens report, the seatbelt was jammed in the retracted position. Now, this is a luxury vehicle, and the seatbelts are actually tailored and have their own conduits which they travel in, And I find it impossible to believe that the seatbelt was jammed by pure accident. My feeling is that this is a highly engineered vehicle, and that somebody tampered with the mechanics of the vehicle, and also they deliberately jammed the seatbelt. In actual fact, right up until the moment of impact with the 13th pillar, no one in the car was wearing a seatbelt. Apparently Trevor Rees-Jones may have used his seatbelt at the last minute, allegedly. And unfortunately, Trevor Rees-Jones has been, really not a good resource of information about what was going on in the Mercedes. There is one comment which alleges that he said once that he doesn't remember much about the journey in the Mercedes, and he hopes that he never does remember. So we had 4 occupants. You had Henri Paul at the wheel.
Yeah.
He didn't have a seatbelt.
No.
Trevor Rees-Jones sitting next to Henri Paul in the front passenger seat, and he didn't have a seatbelt on.
No, the stories up until very recently were that Trevor Rees-Jones was the only person wearing a seatbelt at the point of impact. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt all the way through the journey. We knew that because that's standard bodyguard procedure anyway. He shouldn't have been wearing a seatbelt. But the stories until recently were that in the last few moments before the crash, he managed to get his seatbelt on, and he was the only one wearing a seatbelt. Thus, he was the only survivor. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's come out in the report again that even Trevor Rees-Jones wasn't wearing a seatbelt. So nobody was wearing a seatbelt in that car.
And you can clearly see Dodie
Indeed.
is leaning over, presumably looking out the window at the motorcycle paparazzi. Now, if he did have a seatbelt on, he wouldn't even be able to lean over that far.
No, indeed.
Okay, so the only sole survivor, shall we talk a little bit about Trevor Rees-Jones?
Trevor Rees-Jones.
What's Trevor Rees-Jones' background?
Well, he came from the elite parachute regiment. We know that much, and he joined Mohammed Al Fayed's security staff on leaving the Paras. Mm-hmm. And he was one of Mohammed Al Fayed's security staff on the night of the crash.
Now the Paras are sort of known as a kind of elite kind
they
of.
They are an elite, one notch below perhaps the SAS. You know, they're the elite of the actual army. Yeah, for sure.
Now, is it true that Trevor Rees-Jones says that he remembers nothing?
Yeah, it's true that he says it. Well, he's had a couple of flashbacks, but it might as well be nothing. He remembers being followed by a motorbike, he said. One or two little bits, but irrelevant, really. He remembers virtually nothing, yeah.
Now, there's a book that's been published that carries Trevor Rees-Jones's name on the front cover.
Yeah.
But it actually, the authorship is actually attributed to another person.
Yeah.
Now, I've read that book, and one of the interesting things is that out of the very, very tiny fragments that he does remember, he does actually say that if Henri Paul was speeding at a ridiculous speed, he would have said to Henri Paul, I think you're going a bit too fast. And
Absolutely.
According to Trevor Rees-Jones, that car was not going as fast as the mainstream media told us. So could you just sort of tell us what this whole situation was with the speedometer and the speed?
I mean, it's interesting because, Trevor Rees-Jones has said that. He said if he'd have noticed similarly about Henri Paul's alleged inebriated state, he would have noticed and he would have said, these are trained bodyguards, they're trained to observe people's behaviour, whether they've been drinking, whether they haven't, whether they're driving too fast. This guy was driving the Princess of Wales, and Dodie, who was Trevor Rees-Jones' personal charge that night. So he would have noticed, and he would have got on Henri Paul's case if he was driving recklessly or too fast. But with regard to, what was the other question that you were saying there?
The speedometer.
The speedometer, that's right. The stories that came out immediately after the crash, virtually the next day, plastered all over the British press anyway, was that the speedometer had been stuck. It jammed on 192 kilometres per hour on impact. Now, Mercedes...
That's very fast.
Well, it's very fast anyway, but that's a fact. And but nonetheless, Mercedes cars are made in such a way that the speedometer always reverts to zero. It never jams on 192 or it never jams at any particular speed. It reverts to zero on impact. It's like the airbags coming out. An impact will send the speedometer back to zero. And again, with Lord Stephen's report, we've now we've found discovered that indeed it did revert to zero. So this whole story of the speed of the car being the speedometer, yeah, exactly. It was all planned to show, I believe, to show the evidence suggests that was the media ploy to create this character of Henri Paul. He was drunk, he was driving way too fast. Look how fast he was going. The speedometer stuck on that speed that he was doing.
Yes.
It's nonsense.
It's nonsense, and we know that that's not true, mainly due to the things that Trevor Rhys-Jones has remembered. He remembers that Henri Paul was, just acting normally.
Yeah.
There's never been a suggestion from Trevor Rhys-Jones that Henri Paul was drunk.
Absolutely, not quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. He's made it very, very clear that had Henri Paul been in any way drunk or incapable, there is no way. And not just Trevor Rhys-Jones. Trevor Rhys-Jones' partner on that night, Kes Wingfield, the other bodyguard.
Yes.
Both were in the bar with Henri Paul in the hotel lobby. They were with him all evening once Henri Paul returned back to the Ritz Hotel. For the 2 hours prior to the crash, both of them have said quite clearly, if we thought at any time Henri Paul had been incapable through drink, we would not have let him get behind the car, behind the wheel of the car.
Mr. Alpine, what do you think of the revelations in today's Daily Mirror that in fact Diana thought that Prince Charles was trying to have her killed?
Yeah, but I'm always saying this from the beginning. That is the head of the royal family. And I suspect not only Prince Charles, but without Prince Philip, who is racist at the core.
What evidence do you have for that, Mr. Alpine? There's a damning allegation.
No, but I'm saying it, I'm not worried. I'm saying it all the time, from the beginning.
So what evidence do you have for that?
The evidence is already been detailed in the application which I made in traditional review in Scotland. Right?
Most people, like 99% of authors, when they put a book together, they have, a goal or several goals in mind. What would you like to see happen now that this evidence has come out into the open now through your books?
Well, I mean, the actual book is calling for a public inquiry, an investigation, open investigation into what led up to the crash and what went on at the actual crash scene.
So you'd like a kind of staged or televised thing that all the members of the public could actually watch as it was going on?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the key players involved in what we're saying was an assassination.
There's so much of this evidence is discredited and dismissed as conspiracy theory. That nice, neat little phrase that they've made up and thrown out through the media into the public domain: conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist. And there's a lot of evidence there that's just not being looked at. It certainly hasn't been, given a fair crack of the whip. There's a lot of questions still unanswered, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Diana was assassinated.
So I think the people have got a right to an inquiry. And during the research and writing of the book, we came across, a huge number of people. I mean, I would say, I can't put a percentage on it, but a large number of people know in the back of their minds that it just wasn't a straightforward accident. Something went on in Paris that night, which needs to be investigated properly. I think he's been treated unfairly, regardless of what I think about him as a person. I've never met him, so I can't comment. But I think we have tried to interview him on a couple of occasions, but he wouldn't see us, unfortunately. But regardless of what anybody might think of him as a person, he has been treated rather unfairly.
I think so.
And you do have to ask why.
Yes.
What kind of threat does he pose, or is it because of the fact that he's an Arab Muslim?
Yes.
Is there some kind of racist agenda going on, which is racist, going on here?
Well, you mean that, these ancient European, Germanic kind of royal bloodlines, they are, should we say, suspicious of the Islamic royal bloodlines?
Unquestionably, yeah.
And Diana, again, don't want to retract what we already talked about, but Diana actually going out with an Arab Muslim, an Egyptian Muslim, sorry.
Yes.
Is an up yours establishment, big time. I'm not saying that. I mean, I believe she did have feelings. She was seeing a doctor who was a Muslim before she, from Pakistan, I believe, before she took up with Dodi. But obviously, it's gonna roll the establishment. The fact that he's an Arab Muslim, it doesn't make him any different to any other human being, for a start. Yeah. Yes. But it's something that it is made something out of by the establishment, because he's an Arab Muslim. Again, we go back to these ancient old battles. The Crusades, the 1300-year-old war against the Christians and Muslims, which in some corners is still being fought.
Yes.
Which just create big problems, and ultimately, it was one of the reasons that led to Diana's death.
Well, lots and lots of people, they all know about the relationship between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. Now, what makes that relationship rather untasteful to the British public, or large numbers of the British public, is that, Charles married Diana. He continued to see her, according to Diana, this is, when she appeared on the BBC's Panorama programme. She actually made the statement there were 3 people in the marriage, and the third person that she was referring to was Camilla Parker Bowles. Now, what is really interesting is that a book was published written by a gentleman called Noel Botham, who did some research into Camilla Parker Bowles, and he found that the man that Camilla Parker Bowles had married, Andrew Parker Bowles, he served in the British military as a guards officer, and before marrying Camilla, he had an affair with Prince Charles's sister, Princess Anne. And when you look at the history of royalty around the world, you come across this phenomenon of concubines, sexual mistresses, and the jack in the knave that you get in a deck of cards is a sort of symbolic representation of a young sort of stag that a queen might keep in her closet and use for extramarital affairs. And all royal families throughout history have had concubines. They've had secret lovers stashed away, and they've kept those relationships going for many years. And it's really fascinating because an ancestor of Camilla Parker Bowles, by the name of Ms. Keppel, actually had an affair as a mistress with one of Prince Charles's ancestors. So, what we could surmise from this situation is that the Parker Bowles
were one of these families that served the royal monarchy's need for extramarital affairs. Well, Diana's about 4 or 5 years older than I am, and I was still at school in 1981 when the engagement was announced, and I remember looking at Diana and thinking, wow, what a fantastic looking girl. Now, Prince Charles had, about 10 years previous to this, he'd been chased around by young ladies on beaches, and it become a little bit of a sort of unofficial sport amongst young girls to kiss him, because he was one of the world's most eligible bachelors. But, time went on, and he had affairs with both of Diana's sisters before eventually, proposing to Diana. And basically I thought that it was a bit of a mismatch, because, Diana was only slightly older than I was, and she was a teenager, and Prince Charles was, let's face it, almost middle-aged. And in the Andrew Morton book, Diana, Her True Story, it clearly says that Diana was intimidated by the age of the circle of friends of Prince Charles. I mean, she was a teenager, and all of a sudden she was catapulted into public life, being hounded by the media, burst into tears on a few occasions, and she'd left her family home. And Prince Charles's friends were in their 30s, they were in their 40s, they were in their 50s. And believe it or not, some of them were in their 60s and 70s. In actual fact, one of the friends of Prince Charles is Lawrence Vanderpost, who's written lots of interesting books, and he's very, very interested in paranormal. And he's done various expeditions to the Kalahari and was an acquaintance of Carl Jung. Now, if you can imagine a young girl, a teenager, which was what Diana was, she'd worked as a nanny in a kindergarten, in a nursery in London, all of a sudden being surrounded by royalty, talking about, expeditions to the Kalahari Desert, and not really having any contact anymore with anybody of teenage years. Now, a lot of relationships, it's quite common to have a man who's approaching his 40s, or he's in his early 40s, and his wife is in her 20s, and I think that can work. But in this situation, with Charles having, really a very, very serious love affair with Camilla Parker Bowles that hadn't been fully extinguished by the time that he married the teenage Diana, it was a recipe for disaster. And it's interesting that some of the TV news reports lied about Prince Charles's age. In actual fact, if you have the birth dates correct, Prince Charles in 1981, when the engagement was announced, he wasn't far off from being double Diana's age. Now, the morning, the very, very sad morning where the world learnt that Diana had died, had been killed in this car accident. What happened is that the royal family were at Balmoral, and amazingly, rather than travelling to Paris with their father to see their mother and to pay their last respects to their mother,
the young princes were forced to follow royal protocol and continue to the church for the normal church service which had been planned as normal at Balmoral. And of course that meant that the princes were being dragged in front of the world's media, literally just a few hours after Diana had been killed. I thought that this was extremely callous, and I thought that, okay, you know, it's normal that the princes would attend church, but this was an exceptional case. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, that the service would say prayers for Diana, but there were no prayers said for Diana, none at all. In the Stephen Frears film, The Queen, there is a scene where it's quite clear that the Queen didn't request that the service be changed whatsoever. And I feel so deeply for the young princes. That morning they had to hide their suffering at the loss of their beautiful, enigmatic mother in front of the world's media, being chauffeur-driven from Balmoral to the chapel. Within just a few hours of the news of Diana's death, people started arriving at Balmoral and laying flowers, and they started arriving at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace. And it was obvious from the very beginning that the public really thought that the most fitting end to all of this was a state funeral for Diana. The Queen refused Prince Charles the use of a royal jet. Now, we know this because Prince Charles's staff actually rang around normal commercial airlines trying to find a flight for him, and he was going to be booked onto a flight that would go from, I believe, Manchester to Paris, or via Manchester to Paris. The Queen thought that the best option was to stay at Balmoral, and no statement was made by the royal family, and the flag was not drawn at half-mast above Buckingham Palace. Now, when the Queen's mother died recently, the flag was put at half-mast immediately. And this is such a stupid mistake. If you're going to kill somebody and you're going to order their death, then you shouldn't really give the game away by refusing to put the flag at half-mast. And that, for me, was a telltale sign that the order to kill Diana had come from Buckingham Palace. As it turned out, Prince Charles, to his credit, did actually force his decision through. And Diana was brought back, and her coffin was wrapped in the royal standard, and she was laid to rest at a royal chapel, the chapel at St. James's. Amazingly, it seems that the Queen would have, seen Diana, I don't know, just put into some co-op funeral parlour. And it was really, to his credit, Prince Charles who insisted that Diana's body be
laid to rest in a royal chapel, and that it be a state-organised funeral, which is obviously what the public wanted. Well, I was working in Manchester, and I came back that morning, and my train arrived at Euston Station, and I had to get a connecting train from Charing Cross, which meant that I had to get a black cab and go all the way through central London. And already millions of people had decided that they wanted to be near Diana, and the royal parks were already filling up. And you could smell this amazing perfume from the bunches of flowers that were being laid at Buckingham Palace. And I tipped my London cabbie, and I had a pretty bad quality camera at the time, and he took me on a tour all the way along the Mall. And I got out and I looked at some of the bouquets and some of the cards, as spoke to some of the people. Now, in my mind, it was obvious that Diana had been murdered. And the very first person I spoke to, which was this old lady outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, I spoke to her and I said, you know, I think that she's been done in. And she said, oh yes. Straight away. There was no doubt. And I returned in the evening, and there were candlelight vigils already with people playing guitars around trees in the royal parks. And some of those cards, one of them said, "They have your blood on their hands." Now, make no mistake, it took about 10 years for people to realise that President Kennedy had been murdered. It took people less than 10 minutes, certainly no longer than 10 hours, to put two and two together and realise that this crash had deliberately been planned and Diana had been assassinated in a form of vehicular homicide. And the crowd knew this, and that was the overriding topic. And none of the media reported that properly. However, Alistair Campbell, the chief spin doctor for Tony Blair, walked through the crowds. And a former Labour Party advisor, Derek Draper, appeared on television a couple of years ago and was interviewed. And he was privy to the goings-on at number 10. And Alistair Campbell, according to Derek Draper, reported back to Tony Blair that there was a crackle of emotional, intense feeling, rather like a crowd at a football match where their favourite team had lost and everybody thought that they'd been robbed of the result. And the mood was potentially destructive in terms of it being aimed at the royal family, because the royal family had obviously ostracized Diana, and quite frankly, with millions of people turning up, that could have been an opportunity for revolution. The longer that the flag stubbornly stayed at the bottom of the flagpole above Buckingham Palace, it stoked a feeling of anger, complete and utter anger. The emotional swell within the crowd turned from sorrow to hatred, and that hatred was directed squarely and targeted at the royal family. Now, this is where the tabloid media sent photographers into the crowd, and there were literally dozens and dozens and dozens of photographers, news crews, TV crews, in amongst those crowds. And the headlines the following day, they didn't mention that there was this overriding feeling in the crowd that Diana had been murdered. And so what the media did is they just focused on the grief of the crowd, and they focused on the fact that the flag was not flying at half-mast. But no editor, either in TV media, radio media, or in the press, dared to vocalize the the general feeling amongst the crowd that Diana had been killed. And I can tell you now that the reason that millions and millions of people went onto the streets was simply because we all knew Diana had been murdered. It is as simple as that. And yet that was never reported in any part of the media whatsoever. Even though there were cards attached to bouquets, and some of these were like long letters, open letters written to whoever would actually read those cards, or letters written to Diana, which said more or less, I support you, I love you, Diana, and they should never have killed you.